have not been in this room since the remodel. So, good morning. Welcome to the House and Senate Education Finance Committee, Conference Committee. And with that, we have a quorum and we're going to proceed. And today, what I think we'll do is first, we're going to have everybody introduce themselves really quickly. Then we are going to move to comments from the commissioner. And we'll walk through the spreadsheets, and then we'll walk through the articles. And after each article, we'll stop and see if folks have any questions. So with that, we will start, let's see. Let's start with the Senate side.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. I'm State Senator Mary Kunesh. I am the Chair of Education Finance in the Senate.
Good morning. Samir Job, Committee Administrator, Education Finance.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Jenna Hofer. I'm the nonpartisan fiscal analyst for the Senate Education Committees.
Madam Chair, members, my name is Bjorn Arneson. I'm a nonpartisan analyst for the Senate Education Committees.
Anne-Marie Lewis, Senate Counsel.
Emma Zellmer, Committee Legislative Assistant for Education Finance in the Senate.
Good morning, I'm Liz Bolden. I serve in the Minnesota Senate representing District 25, which is most of Rochester and some areas north. I serve on the Education Policy Committee.
Good morning, everybody. Steve Swedzinski, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Chair of the Education Policy Committee.
Ryan Majerus, Senate DFL Research.
And I'm Representative Cheryl Youakim, Chair of Ed Finance.
Polly Sirk-Vennick, Committee Administrator, Education Finance in the House.
Representative Mary Frances Clardy, I'm Vice Chair of Ed Finance.
Heather Edelson, I represent Edina and Bloomington.
Representative Samantha Sensumura, I represent District 63A, South Minneapolis, and serve on Education Finance.
Ron Krisha, Education Finance, and I represent 10A.
Jody Withers, House Republican Caucus Research.
Mars Beltrandi Redquist, DFL Caucus Research. Tim Strom, House Research.
Christina Para, House Research. Solveig Beckel, House Fiscal.
Wonderful. Thank you, folks. So with that, I think we'll go right to is the commissioners here for some comments. Commissioner Jett, welcome to the conference committee. Please state your name for the record and then proceed.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Willie Jett. I have the pleasure to serve as the Commissioner of Education. First, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to provide some remarks on the conference committee. And I know we've had this opportunity and we've had this conversation. I just appreciate the chance to recap it. So first, I'd like to thank you for carrying all the governor's supplemental budget recommendations between the two bills. The vast amount are necessary and technical refinements of the good work done in the 2023 session. Thanks for assigning the set aside from last year voluntary pre-kindergarten seats, reaching our target a year early. We are excited about the expanded opportunities for our littlest learners. Thank you for including the definition of qualifying services for English learner cross-subsidy expenditures, more clearly defining these expenditures such that districts and charter schools are reporting information to MDE consistently, make sure families have clear expectations on how revenue is used at the local level. While the governor's bill took a lean approach to this session, I'm very encouraged by investments made in this bill that fit within the leadership targets and also to provide some thoughts on some of these other proposals. We appreciate the strong investments in the READ Act and prioritizing resources to support teachers to get more training to be able to deliver evidence-based literacy instruction. My team and I truly appreciate the leadership and partnership of Representative Edelson and Senator May Quaid with the MDE team and education partners along the way. I also appreciate the focus on improving student attendance. This is another area that I've been hearing about all over the state as we continue to face one of the great challenges to our educational recovery from the pandemic, engaging students and consistent attendance. I'm also excited to see investments in this space and look forward to working with you on how we can best leverage the great work of our Compass team around the multi-tiered systems of support and building capacity and expertise around the state. I believe with limited resources, as a follow-up to the work that everyone here did last session, and the reality that there will always be more work to be done, This bill provides a range of very good proposals to meet current needs around literacy, early education, English learners, attendance, and needed technical tweaks. So, Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for your work this session, and I look forward to partnering together, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is going to take some getting used to. Thank you, Commissioner. With that, I see we have Senator McQuaid joining us. I'll let her introduce herself quickly, and then we'll go through the walkthrough of the spreadsheets.
Morning, everybody. Senator Erin McQuaid, Senate District 56, mom to a toddler who doesn't respect my time. Glad to be here.
A lot of us been there. With that, I think we'll go right on to Solveig Beckel and Jenna Hofer to go through these spreadsheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Solveig Beckel, House Fiscal. My colleague Jenna Hofer from the Senate and I will be going through the spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is titled 2024 Legislature Education Finance Committee's Net Changes from February 2024 Forecast Base. So this is the change-only spreadsheet. We will not be going through the full spreadsheet today. And then it will be comparing the House file, the third engrossment, and the Senate file, the first unofficial engrossment. This shows the House position and the Senate position. The House position is in the middle, the Senate position farther to the right. And I will begin with the general education changes. Line 3, the compensatory pilot program is being reinstated. The House and Senate have the same numbers for this provision. There is no cost in the 24-25 biennium, but a cost of $13.918 million in the 26-27 biennium. Line 4, the English Learner Task Force. This is a House provision only. This provision is $117,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. Line 5, this is additional general education funding due to the increased number of voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. So there are going to be a number of items labeled additional VPK seats as we walk through this spreadsheet. When you increase the pupil units, you are going to see a number of changes across various funding formulas. So just look out for those. So for general education, the change is the same for the House and the Senate, and it has a cost of $29.806 million in fiscal years 24 and 25. And then just the cleanup payment, or the 10% payment from the previous year's entitlement in fiscal year 26 of $3.311 million. Line 6 is the local optional revenue levy offset, again for the additional VPK levy VPK seats. When you add pupil units, that also impacts the levies. The House Education Finance Committee and the Senate Education Finance Committee had a 0 levy target. So that meant that both committees were required to pay down the levy impacts. So that's what you see on this line. So the levy changed partially on the referendum market value and partially on the adjusted net tax capacity. So here you see the changes to the local optional revenue, and that has a change of $3.894 million in fiscal year 25 and $432,000 in fiscal year 26. Line 7 is very similar. It's the operating capital revenue levy offset. That has a change of $826,000 in fiscal year 25 and $92,000 in fiscal year 26. Line 8, this was a House provision only, the Student Attendance Legislative Study Group. This is just a study group to look at the attendance issue and work on ideas for future years. This is a cost of $64,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. Line 9 is the Student Attendance Pilot Program. Both the House and the Senate had a version of this program. The Senate's version was called the Student Connections Pilot Program, but both had the same intent of working on the student absenteeism issue that the state is facing. The House proposal is $3.334 million in fiscal year '25, available through the end of fiscal year '27, and the Senate proposal is $5 million in fiscal year 2025, available through the end of fiscal year '27. And the next item is a Senate-only provision, so I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Hofer.
Madam Chair and committee members, again, my name is Jenna Hofer. I am the nonpartisan fiscal analyst for the Senate Education Committee. On line 10 is a Senate-only proposal. This would reduce an appropriation from last session, which was $1 million in total to the Windham School District for supplemental aid associated with a potential decline in students as a result of a pork processing plant closure. The aid for this has already been paid out to the district, and as a result, there's $840,000 remaining that will cancel back to the general fund. The Senate proactively cancels this amount, $840,000, in fiscal year 2024. On line 11, begin the appropriations contained within Article 2, Education Excellence. On line 12 is another line item that's associated with the increase in the additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. This is an increase to the Achievement and Integration Aid. The House and Senate have the same amount, $304,000 in the 24-25 biennium and $34,000 in the 26-27 biennium. On line 13, the House and Senate both provide funding for civic education grants, though the recipients of the grant are slightly different in the House and Senate. Both provide $150,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Beckel, who will discuss the House's line 14.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Line 14 is a House-only provision. The computer science Pellsby licensing carve-out. So this line just shows a $50,000 carve-out in fiscal year 2025 only from the computer science appropriation from the 2023 session. This was a $500,000 appropriation in fiscal year '25, so $450,000 remains in fiscal year 2025. And the $50,000 for this will be set aside and for a transfer to Pellsby for computer science licensing work. Line 15 is the Digital Citizenship Task Force, which is a Senate provision, so I will hand that back over to Ms. Hofer.
Madam Chair and members, on line 15, the Senate proposes providing $151,000 in fiscal year 2025 only for the per diem and administrative costs of the Digital Citizenship Task Force. The footnote here indicates that the appropriation is available through fiscal year 2026. Line 16 is another Senate-only provision. This would provide funding to the Dyslexia Institute of Minnesota in the amount of $450,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. This appropriation is available through fiscal year 2026. Line 17, the Senate proposes providing a grant to the Girl Scouts of the River Valleys. This would be a one-time appropriation of $500,000 in fiscal year 2025. Line 18, the House and the Senate both propose providing funding for health standards rulemaking costs, but in a slightly different manner. You'll see that the House proposes providing $627,000 in fiscal year 2025 only, with availability through fiscal year 2027. This would cover the rulemaking and standards development costs, as well as the costs for an FTE to assist with the development making. And this FTE would be available through fiscal year 2027. The Senate, on the other hand, proposes providing $132,000 only for the rulemaking and standards development, and this would be available through fiscal year 2026. On line 19, the House and Senate both propose providing funding to the Minnesota Alliance with Youth for the Promise Fellows program. The House would provide $1.5 million in fiscal year 2025 only, and this funding would be available through fiscal year 2027, while the Senate would provide $625,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. On line 20, is a proposal to provide funding for the Minnesota Alliance with Youth for the Youth Council. The House and Senate both proposed providing funding for this in different amounts. The House would provide $750,000 in fiscal year 2025 only, with availability through fiscal year 2027, while the Senate would propose providing $375,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. Lines 21 and 22 go together, and the House and Senate both have proposals related to the P-TECH schools, but they address them in slightly different manners. Both would provide extended availability for the fiscal year 2025 appropriation, and this would be available through 2027. The Senate does this in a slightly different manner by canceling the appropriation in fiscal year 2025 and reappropriating that money in fiscal year 2025, and this would be in order to comply with the budget rules, which require that any extended availability beyond the current biennium be tracked as a separate cost. On line 23 is a Senate-only proposal. This would be funding for the Emergency Medical Training Grant. This would be an increase in fiscal year 2025 only of $250,000, and this funding would go specifically to the St. Cloud School District for the building and construction costs related to an emergency medical services facility. Line 24 is another Senate-only provision. This is a grant to 826 MSP for the Writing Skills Grant. This would be a one-time appropriation of $300,000 in fiscal year 2025, and this would be available through fiscal year 2026. Line 25 begins the READ Act appropriations, and you'll note that there's a footnote with this one, and Ms. Beckel will address that footnote in just a bit as the House and Senate approach the READ Act appropriations in a slightly different manner. On line 26, both the House and Senate proposed providing additional funding for professional development, and this funding would be available through fiscal year 28 in both bills. The House provides $4 million in fiscal year 2025 only, while the Senate provides $7 million in fiscal year 2025 only. Line 27 is a Senate-only provision. This would provide $1.5 million in fiscal year 2025, and this would be reimbursements to teachers who provided who paid for the cost of evidence-based reading instruction programs out of their own pockets. Line 28 is listed as a Senate-only provision, though it's similar in some ways to some of the House proposals. The Senate provides the regional literacy networks with $500,000 in fiscal year 2025 only to provide paraprofessional training. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Beckel, who will begin on the top of page 2, line 29, with the supplemental READ Act funding.
Thank you. So line 29 shows the total supplemental READ Act funding as displayed in the House file. So that's $33.225 million in fiscal year 2025. In the House file, all of the new funds appropriated, so not including the $4 million on the previous page that Ms. Hofer went over, all funds, so on this page, the $33.225 million would be for immediate transfer to the Special Revenue Fund for the READ Act program account. So then funds would just be appropriated to the commissioner for use out of that fund for these appropriated items. The other items that were funded last year, including the professional development this year, because that is just amending and adding more funding to an item that was funded last year, those items would transfer to the Special Revenue Fund READ Act program account at the end of fiscal year 2028 under the House language. So to go into a bit more detail, and the Senate, of course, has comparable measures, but the Senate does not have the READ Act special revenue account. Line 30 is the paraprofessional and volunteer training development appropriation. This is $375,000 in fiscal year 25. Line 31 is the deaf-blind, and hard of hearing working group. This is $100,000 in fiscal year 25. The Senate also appropriates $100,000 in fiscal year 25, but this would not go into the account, and so would have availability just through fiscal year 2025, as is how it typically works. Line 32 is the Regional Literacy Networks paraprofessional and volunteer training. That is very similar to an item that Ms. Hofer referenced on the previous page. That is $375,000 in fiscal year '25. Line 33 is the supplemental culturally responsive materials. Again, the Senate has this item as well, and both the House and the Senate spend $1 million on this item. However, the Senate has this available until fiscal year '26. Through fiscal year '26, I should say. Line 34 is the teacher stipends and other professional development. So this is the largest appropriation in the group, and that is $31.375 million for the House and $23.8 million for the Senate. For the Senate, this has availability through fiscal year 2028. Line 35, teachers. Line 36, you see another additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats item, the alternative teacher compensation aid. Both the House and the Senate have this at $450,000 in fiscal year '25 only. Or, excuse me, in fiscal year '25 and $50,000 in fiscal year '26. And then line 37, I will hand over to Ms. Hofer.
Madam Chair and committee members, on line 37 is a Senate-only provision. This would increase funding for the Collaborative Urban and Greater Minnesota Teachers of Color Grant Program by $1 million in fiscal year 2025 only. Line 38 is a Senate-only provision that would increase funding for the Mentoring and Retention Incentive Grants for Teachers of Color by $5 million in fiscal year 2025 only. And Madam Chair, I would turn it over to Ms. Beckel to address line 39, which is a House-only provision.
Line 39 is the paid student teaching pilot. This would provide set amounts of stipends to student teachers at a number of universities throughout the state, not all, to show the state what it would look like if students were able to receive funding for their student teaching. And that is for 1 year only, as it is just a pilot program. So that's $7 million in fiscal year 2025. But it has availability through fiscal year 2026. Line 40 is the Special Education Apprenticeships Program. This is the same in the House and the Senate. It's $1.03 million in fiscal year 2025 only, with availability through fiscal year '27. Line 41 is a Senate-only item. So to you, Ms. Hofer.
Madam Chair and members, on line 41, the Senate proposes providing funding for the administrative and per diem costs of the Teacher and Paraprofessional Compensation Working Group. This would be $150,000 in fiscal year 2025 only. Line 42 begins appropriations to charter schools. On line 43 is a proposal from both the House and the Senate that relates to the additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. This would increase charter school lease aid by $328,000 in fiscal year 2025, and then $37,000 in fiscal year 2026. Line 44 is a Senate-only provision to provide safe schools aid to charter schools. This would be $3 million in fiscal year 2025 only, and the funding would be available for the safe schools uses available currently to districts. And at this point, I will turn it over to Ms. Beckel, who will begin the special education items on line 45.
On line 46 is the Special Education Contracted Report. This is a House-only provision, and it has a cost of $440,000 in fiscal year '25. Under this, the Department of Education would contract with an outside entity to do a report on special education. Line 47, special education additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. This has a cost of $1.041 million in fiscal year '25 and $146,000 in fiscal year '26. Health and safety includes Senate-only provisions.
Madam Chair and members, on line 49 is a Senate proposal to provide $1 million in fiscal year 2025, and this would be available through fiscal year 2026 to assist districts with implementation of cardiac emergency response plans. Line 50 begins the appropriations under the Facilities article. On line 51 is another proposal related to the increase in the voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. The House and the Senate would both provide $235,000 in fiscal year 2025 and $26,000 in fiscal year 2026. Line 52 begins the appropriations in the Nutrition and Libraries article. Line 53 is related to the additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. This would be an increase to the school breakfast program. The House and the Senate both provide $413,000 in fiscal year 2025. Line 54 is also related to the increase in the voluntary pre-kindergarten seats. This would increase the school lunch appropriation in both the House and Senate bills by $699,000. Members, if you'll turn to page 3, line 55 begins the early childhood education appropriations. Line 56, the House and the Senate would both repeal an appropriation that was made available last year. This was the voluntary pre-kindergarten reserve allocation. This required that the House and the Senate act to provide funding for voluntary pre-kindergarten seats in fiscal year 2025. And as Ms. Beckel and I have described, that has been allocated across the school finance formulas to provide 5,200 additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats in fiscal year 2025. On line 57 begins appropriations to the state agencies. On line 58 is a Senate-only proposal to provide funding to the Department of Education for the administrative costs and per diem costs of administering the Permanent School Fund Distribution of Earnings Task Force. This would be a one-time appropriation of $64,000 in fiscal year 2025. Lines 59 and 60 work together in the Senate bill. This is a Senate-only proposal on line 59 to provide funding for the cost of a state school librarian. This would be $130,000 in the 24-25 biennium and $260,000 in the 26-27 biennium. The Senate also proposes reducing the unemployment aid that's available to the Department of Education by $130,000 in the 24-25 biennium and $260,000 in the 26-27 biennium. Line 61, the House and the Senate both propose providing funding to Pelsby for IT costs related to the Educator online licensing system, and this funding would be available through fiscal year 2027. This is $2,767,000 in the 24-25 biennium. Line 62 shows the total general fund adjustments made by the House and the Senate. The House increases general fund spending by $43 million in the 24-25 biennium and $18,046,000 in the 26-27 biennium. The Senate increases general fund appropriations by the same amount, $43 million in the 24-25 biennium and $18,046,000 in the 26-27 biennium. To discuss the special revenue fund expenditures, I would turn it over to Ms. Beckel to discuss the first, which is a House-only provision.
Thank you. On line 63, you can see the special revenue fund expenditures. On line 64 is the READ Act program account that I referenced earlier when we went through the READ Act. So this is the $33.225 million in appropriations made in the supplemental funding. So those appropriations would go to the special revenue fund. You can see the revenues on line 67, actually, and then the expenditure authority out of that account you can see on line 64. So that, of course, is a House-only provision. Then line 65 is the unemployment aid for hourly workers over the summer. This aid itself is not, the amount is not changing, but the department requested that it be moved from a 100% current year payment to a 90% current year, 10% prior year payment schedule. So you can just see that those funds are being shifted slightly, but the biennia add together to zero. So it's negative $5.16 million in the first biennium and positive $5.16 million in the second biennium. So the funds are just being shifted. Then line 69 begins the levy adjustments. This is typically not something you would include in the aid spreadsheet, but this is just so that it's all in one handy spreadsheet for you to see. And this shows the individual levy impacts on the individual levies from due to the voluntary pre-kindergarten student increase. And these provisions are the same on both the House and Senate side. So for line 71, you can see the operating capital, the levy was decreased by $844,000 in fiscal year '26. And it was decreased because of the buy down. If you remember from earlier in the spreadsheet, the House and Senate both bought down operating capital levies and local optional levies. So there were costs to both of those, but then the House and Senate essentially appropriated funds to the levies to buy them down. So that's why those items are negative in this list. Line 72, equity, $223,000 in fiscal year '26. Line 73, local optional revenue, $3.214 million in fiscal year '26. Line 74, transition levy, $90,000 in fiscal year '26. Line 75, referendum revenue, or referendum levy, $2.901 million in fiscal year '26. Line 76, the achievement and integration levy, $145,000 in fiscal year '26. Line 77, the long-term facilities maintenance unequalized levy, $373,000 in fiscal year '26. Line 78, the Q-comp or alternative compensation aid levy, $224,000 in fiscal year '26. And then finally, on the back, the line 79 Safe Schools levy, which is only levy, no aid, $101,000 in fiscal year '26. And if you look at line 80, you can see that all of those changes net to zero. So the House and Senate have both met their zero target for levies. And Madam Chair, that is the spreadsheet.
Thank you, Sylvia Beckel and Jenna Hofer, for walking through that. Members, I would go to the table for any questions on the spreadsheet. Yep, Representative Kunesh.
So just on the Senate provision, can you explain the window for us?
Jenna Hofer?
Madam Chair and members, Representative Kunesh, thank you for the question. So on line 10, the Senate proposes reducing by $840,000 the Windham School District one-time supplemental aid. So during the last session, the tax bill provided $1 million to the Windham School District, and this was for a one-time supplemental aid to assist the district with a potential decline in students as a result of the pork processing plant closure. At the time, it was unknown how many students the district might lose as a result of the processing plant closure. The funding formula was based on an October 1st enrollment count, and so at this point, that enrollment count is final, and the district saw a reduction of 16 pupils. And so as a result, the aid to the district was $160,000 in fiscal year 2024. So that left $840,000 of the appropriation that would cancel back to the general fund at the end of this fiscal year. So as a result, the Senate proposed to proactively cancel that funding and use it in this education supplemental budget.
Representative Kunesh.
And I'm just curious, how is Windham handling this with their budget? Do they know this is coming? I just don't know the details.
Ms. Hofer.
Madam Chair and Representative Kunesh, thank you for the question. So at this point, the district received all of the funding that they were entitled to under the funding formula, and so they are not expecting to receive this $840,000 because they've already been paid for the students that they declined from the previous year.
Representative Kunesh.
Okay. Just a couple other ones. We're adding some positions. The state librarian, will that have any decision-making authority, and was that requested by the commissioner?
Who would like to take that?
And I don't know who.
Chair Kunesh.
Senator Kresha, the,
Representative would be better.
excuse me? I mix my my titles up, having been in both bodies. The state school library media specialist came from a bill that I put together, and it would act as, this person would act as a support system with resources and different skills to help library media specialists across the state to implement their, and support the READ Act with literacy efforts, as well as to ensure that those that are, that have those school library media specialists in those positions have the support from the state when it comes to implementing all the curriculum and the resources and the expectations for those schools.
Representative Kresha.
Okay, and so any decision-making authority, and did the commissioner, this came from a bill, but did the commissioner request this?
Chair
And
Kunesh.
if Commissioner Jett, I'm just curious.
The commissioner,
Chair Kunesh.
thank you. The commissioner did not request this.
Okay.
Representative Kresha.
Decision-making authority?
Chair Kunesh.
Could you be more specific on what you mean by decision-making authority?
Yeah, are they
Representative Kresha.
eventually, would this position be involved with rulemaking? Would they be sending things down to schools that they would have to follow? You had mentioned a support position. So is this just someone, is it just a nice to have to call and have a resource? Is that what we're looking to do?
Chair Kunesh.
Something like that. As far as rulemaking in the other areas, they would be under the supervision of the state librarian. And so there would be, I don't believe they would have those rulemaking authority.
Representative Kresha.
Okay, so just sounds like, okay, I appreciate that. No further questions on that.
Thank you. Any other member questions on the spreadsheet? Representative Spencer Mira.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is about line 43. The charter school lease aid additional VPK. Sorry, not used to turning the mic on. So my question's about line 43, the charter school lease aid additional VPK seats. And I think I probably just missed this in committee because I know it's on the House spreadsheet as well, but are some of the VPK seats going to charter schools, or can you explain what this aid is for?
Ms. Beckel.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Spencer Mira. So when you increase pupil units, that triggers a number of formula changes. So a number of those are just tied to the general education formula as well. So that charter school lease aid is just basically related to an increase in the number of pupils. And so that 5,200 is just going to increase there. However, to your question, are there any voluntary pre-kindergarten seats going to charter schools? There are a number of different programs that provide voluntary pre-kindergarten around the state. And I believe that there are some charter schools in that mix. I can provide you a list of all of the schools that have received voluntary pre-kindergarten funding. And it's based on a variety of factors, including poverty and voluntary pre-kindergarten region that are set in statute.
Representative Spencer Mira.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Beckel. So just for more clarity about that, so we allocate the seats, then we allocate them by region, and then from there, some of those seats could go to charter schools. Is that correct?
Mr. Strom or Ms. Parra?
Madam Chair, Representative Sensimura, yes, the region, there are currently four. The bill, one of the bills proposes 5 regions, but the 4 regions currently include one for the charter schools. And the way that the funding for the VPK program is divided amongst regions is it's that region's proportion of kids to the state total. So the charter school students are not quite 8% of the state's, I believe about 8% of the state's total pupils. So about 8% of those 5,200 VPK seats are going to charter schools. And as Ms. Beckel said, the charter schools are then ranked from highest to lowest poverty count and availability of other pre-K options near them, and that ranking is used to award those. So the charter schools, just as with the school districts in each of the regions, are lined up from highest to lowest poverty, and the seats are awarded in that fashion.
Representative Censor Murrow.
Thank you. Yeah, that answers that. And then my second question was just about line 49, because we didn't have that in the House. If someone from the Senate would be able to explain a little bit more about the cardiac emergency response plan assistance.
Would like to take that one. Representative McQuaid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This
Senator,
was,
sorry.
It's fine. I've been both. This was a provision from Senator Westland that requires districts to do a, much like we have lockdown drills, it would be a cardiac response plan and process if there were a cardiac event at school, whether it was an educator or a student. Yeah, that's what it was.
And then Chair Kunesh.
And I do believe there, the bill proposal had some dollars in there for schools that didn't have the equipment in place. And so it's both the response and the equipment.
Representative Censor Murrow. Thank you. Any other further questions on the spreadsheet? Seeing none, I want to also let Senator Gustafson introduce herself. We did that in the meeting.
Oh my gosh, I can't get to the mic.
I know these tables, these chairs are too short, too.
Hi, I'm Heather Gustafson. I'm the senator from SD 36. I apologize for being late. Every hallway looks the same in this building, so thank you.
No worries. With that, we are going to move on then to the walkthrough of the articles, and we'll be having Tim Strom, Christina Parra, Anne Marie Lewis, and Bjorn Arneson go through them. And members, we're going to stop after each article to see if folks have questions. With that, I'll kick it over to Mr. Strom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, there are two documents we'll use to walk through the side-by-sides. The first of those is the bill summary. The bill summary is oriented with the House on the left, House File 5237 on the left. The corresponding Senate provisions are on the right, and sometimes they're matched to the article where they land in the House bill instead. There are several columns, including a middle column in the summary that compares the provisions in just a few words, whether the provision is the same, similar, and if so, how different, and whether there's a comparable provision or not. So for members who want to know more about the differences, perhaps working off the bill summary is easiest. Also in your packets is the side-by-side prepared by our wonderful reviser, Cassie Rooney. That side-by-side again puts the House language on the left, the Senate language on the right, and highlights those parts of the language that are different. So if members are following along on the side-by-side language, the highlighting, the shaded portion, shows places where there are differences between the House and the Senate. One final comment before we get underway. The House and Senate often take a slightly different drafting approach. So many of the provisions this year in the two bills are quite similar, have the same intent, but are drafted just slightly differently. So I think you'll find when we get to the list, hopefully either later today or soon thereafter, of the sames and similars, a whole number of these provisions are going to look a lot alike, and it's really technical language difference with no effect. That's the difference for many of these. That said, Madam Chair, I'll start. When we get to the first Senate provision, we'll switch sides and continue with the Senate researcher describing the provisions on down until we switch back again. Section 1 appears in Article 1 General Education, just removes a technical reference. There used to be two classes of kindergarten students. Those were unified last year, and there are still some old references to the kindergarten students without a disability. That reference shows up about 4 times in statutes and is unnecessary any longer. Section 2 has to do with a provision that was adopted last year authorizing $1 million of funding for Area Learning Center transportation. The House and Senate in this provision have similar language, but the Senate has a better cross-reference to the cooperative units. Section 3 has the definition that Commissioner spoke about related to the qualifying English language services on the House side. There is a slightly different way of wording this on the Senate side, and you'll see a technical amendment from us to bring the House and Senate EL provisions into alignment with each other.
Madam Chair, as Mr. Strom said, the sections 3 and 4 on the Senate side seek to accomplish essentially the same thing as is accomplished in House Section 3. Section 4 on the Senate side codifies the English learner, or recodifies the English learner cross-subsidy aid into its own subdivision. House Section 4 and Senate Section 5 are substantially similar, and this relates to the payment schedule for the UI aid. Section 5 and 6 relating to learning year pupil units are another instance where the words "without a disability" need to be stricken, pruned out of statute to conform with last year's bill. House Section 6 and Senate Section 7 on page R5 are the sections that increase the strength of the local optional levy equalization to offset the additional VPK seats authorized later in this bill. House Section 7 and Senate Section 8, again, seek to accomplish the same thing, which is to clean up the language around the compensatory education revenue formula and to continue the amounts under the compensatory pilot grants beyond fiscal year 2025. And I'll just draw also attention to House paragraph G and H and Senate paragraphs F and G that clean up with some technical language the hold harmless calculation, provide direction to the commissioner to proportionately increase the amounts provided to each building, and in both the House and Senate language, extend the hold harmless beyond fiscal year 2027. Senate Section 9 is sort of complementary to the previous Senate section and recodifies language stricken from Senate Section 8, paragraph F into an existing definitions section in 126C10 subdivision 3A. House Section 8 and Senate Section 10 strike duplicative redundant language in paragraph B of subdivision 3C in the same way. They're identical.
Madam Chair, members, on the bottom of page R8, on the House side, the House and Senate do the same thing in the next two provisions, but just write it slightly differently to provide certainty about how the operating capital aid and levy shares are calculated. These are in section 11 on the Senate side. You can see in paragraph B there on lines 1014 to 1016 does the same thing. The pupil transportation adjustment in section 11, the House and Senate have the similar intent here, and we just need to clarify whether the previous fiscal year is the right fiscal year or not there. Just a technical question that staff will work out.
Madam Chair, on the top of page R10 is a Senate-only provision. This proposes to include tribal contract schools in the apportionment of proceeds from the school endowment fund.
Madam Chair, members, section 12 on the bottom of page R10 is a provision that was one of the vehicle bills, trying to clean up the statute a bit by correcting an errant cross-reference. The next section then is the general education aid appropriation. You can see here the House and Senate both spend the same amount. This is the forecast adjusted amount as well as the amount with the VPK addition in it. So the increase there is the same in both the House and the Senate. The only difference in this is, again, an effective date issue, which is a technical issue, no change in effect. The next provision, the House and Senate do the same, again with an effective date difference, just in clarifying that for the War Road School District, which operates the Angle Inlet School, that program is an aid program, not a grant program.
Madam Chair, near the bottom of page R11 is a Senate-only provision, section 16, relating to the Wyndham School District one-time supplemental aid cancellation that we discussed earlier this morning. Madam Chair, at the top of page R12 is a section relating to basic skills account transfers. The language is identical here. The Senate proposes an immediate effective date, I think, which would have the effect of authorizing schools to make the transfer at the end of fiscal year 2024, but otherwise the provisions are identical.
Madam Chair, members, on the bottom of page R12, the House has the first of several task forces that appear in the House and Senate proposals this year. This is a task force on English language learner programs. Representative Clardy was the author of this provision in the House. Essentially, the task force members are, task force is established, the members are specified, and on page R13, the duties of the task force are described. Questions on the task force may best be directed to the author if you like, but this is the first of these task forces that you'll see throughout the bill. Section 17 is the program Ms. Beckel mentioned regarding student attendance. It's a pilot program to increase student attendance, and you can see there the participating school districts are listed at the bottom of page R14. The idea behind the House provision is that the participating school districts would periodically meet and collaborate on developing effective strategies to reduce student absences and make recommendations essentially as to how other districts could improve their attendance and what programs work and not. One issue on the strategies listed, you'll see that there's some language there that describes each of the strategies presented. And one of the thoughts of the House author, Representative Keeler, on this was to ask that districts also consider some strategies that may be a little outside the norm in hopes that they would work. So the reporting essentially then starts on page R16, and you can see that there's periodic reports starting with one this December and 3 following reports. Madam Chair, members, section 18 then on the same page is the second of the legislative study groups or working groups set up. This is a legislative group that would be meeting under the auspices of the LCC to provide a forum for learning about student attendance and truancy issues. The duties are outlined beginning at the very bottom of that page, and you can roll over to the next page there and see those duties listed. The meetings and the chair, as I said, are under the LCC, and which is providing the administrative support, and the report then of the task force is due by December 31st, 2024. So a rather quick timeline for this group. Madam Chair, members, the next provision on the House side is the actual appropriation for the attendance pilot program. As Ms. Beckel pointed out, that's $3.3 million, and you can see listed on page R18 for each of the districts in the House pilot what the amounts of aid would be for those districts. That aid is 100% payable in 2025, but is intended for districts to spread over a 3-year period, which is the length of the pilot program.
Madam Chair, the Senate proposes a similar pilot program relating to student attendance. The program would be a competitive grant program, directing the commissioner to select pilot program participants around the state. It would require reporting. It would provide a one-time appropriation with extended availability, kind of in a similar fashion to the House idea. On page R19, House Subdivision 3 and Senate Subdivision 6 are very, very similar. The amounts, of course, are different, as described earlier. The House proposes to extend the availability. The Senate proposes to specify a 3% grant administration allowance, which is smaller than the statutory amount that would otherwise be allowed. But otherwise, the language is very, very similar.
Madam Chair, members, subdivisions 4 and 5 on the House appropriations side are the appropriations for the 2 study groups and work groups so far, the $64,000 for the student attendance and truancy study group and $117,000 for the English Learner Program task force. And Madam Chair, that's it for Article 1.
Thank you both. Members, are there any questions on Article 1? Seeing none, we'll go on to Article 2.
Madam Chair and members, Article 2 is the education excellence. And again, the House language is on the left and the Senate language is on the right of the revisor side by side. Sections 1 through 7 on both sides are same or similar. They all relate to the adoption of statewide health standards. So the first section adds health to the list of content areas for which statewide standards are required, but maintains local standards until the end of the 26-27 school year, or statewide rules implementing state standards are effective, whichever is later. Section 2 requires state standards in health education, but again maintains those local standards for a few more years. Section 3 adds, again, health standards to the statute relating to the process for developing standards and adds current students to the list of stakeholders that are consulted when developing the standards. Section 4 requires the commissioner to use the rulemaking process to adopt the statewide rules for the health standards. Section 5 adds health standards to the statute that lists the 10-year cycle for reviewing and revising each set of standards. So the health standards review would begin in the 34-35 school year. Section 6 adds health standards to the graduation requirements. And Section 7 is a little more detail about what would be in the health standards. It requires expectations that are under current law that districts are required to provide instruction in. So those would be required to be in the state standards, along with mental health education, which is currently encouraged but not required. And then there's also a list of other subject areas that the commissioner may include in the state standards, and those are expectations that under current law are encouraged but not required.
Madam Chair, members, if you go to page R6, at the bottom of that on the Senate side is our Senate Section 1. It came in by a floor amendment, and that provision prohibits a district or charter school from restricting a student's academic freedom.
Madam Chair and members, on page R7, is a House-only provision. That's Section 8. It relates to the P-TECH program. There are several sections relating to this program, but the first one is a House-only provision modifying the existing application process to apply to implementation or support grants. The next section, Section 9, is the same in House and Senate, just striking an obsolete reference. And then Section 10 is similar for House and Senate, relating to the P-TECH grants, dividing the funding into different types of grants, setting a maximum support grant at no more than $500,000 per year per recipient, and then there's support grants, there's startup grants, and then mentorship and technical assistance grants, and each of those has a maximum of $50,000. The next section is similar in the House and Senate, and it's relates to the Minnesota Youth Council, clarifying the membership of the council. It would be grades 8 through 12, rather than age-based, which is currently ages 13 to 19.
Madam Chair and members, on page R8, bottom of R8 is the emergency medical training grant, and increases that grant to give $250,000 to the St. Cloud School District. Madam Chair, members, then going on, bottom of R9 is the Section 12 in the House file, Section 9 in the Senate file, and it's achievement and integration aid, and it's increases based on those additional VPK seats, and it's similar language in both bodies.
Madam Chair, members, Section 13 on page R10. It's a House-only provision modifying an appropriation from last year for computer science advancement. The bill last year appropriated $500,000 in fiscal year '25. And the House-only provision here requires $50,000 of that appropriation to be transferred to Pellsby for computer science teacher licensure activities. The next section, Section 14, is the same in both bodies, and this is a change that you'll see in several sections, just adding language to last year's appropriation, saying that in this case, the ethnic studies school grants, any balance in the first year doesn't cancel but is available in the second year. Section 15 makes the same change, both House and Senate. That's for the full-service community schools.
Madam Chair, members, Section 12 of the Senate file is an adjustment to the payment timeline for the Minnesota Council on Economic Education grant. Then Section 16 of the House file and Section 13 of the Senate file are the same, and it is the appropriation for the non-exclusionary discipline grants. Section 17 of the House file and Section 14 of the Senate file are the appropriation related to the P-TECH schools, and they are different. The Senate file cancels the 2025 appropriation, which is then appropriated later. And then the House file adjusts the distribution and the timing of the appropriation. Section 15 of the Senate file, for which there's not a comparable provision in the House file, is the Digital Citizenship, Internet Safety, and Media Literacy Advisory Council. And then, Madam Chair, members, that gets us to page R14, which is the appropriation sections for each body. The first one is the civic education grants, which they are given to different entities. Then the next one is the subdivision 3 on the Senate file, which is the Digital Citizenship, Internet Safety, and Media Literacy Advisory Council. The Senate has an appropriation for the Dyslexia Institute of Minnesota, then appropriation to the Girl Scouts, River Valleys. And then both bodies have appropriations for the Minnesota Youth Council in differing amounts. Then there's appropriation to the department for the rulemaking related to the health education standards. Then the Senate has subdivision 8, which is the 2025 appropriation for the P-TECH schools. Senate then has a grant to 826 MSP for a writing skills program. And then that's the end of Article 2.
Thank you. Members, any questions on Article 2? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 3.
Madam Chair, members, Article 3 is the READ Act. And I guess one thing to preface it, most of the language that is in the side-by-side that you see here is actually also already in the policy conference committee report that was posted yesterday, I believe. So I won't go into too much detail on these provisions, particularly the House had all of the language in the finance bill, while the Senate had more of a policy finance division. So even where you don't see Senate language here on the side-by-side, they did have same or similar language. So I'll go through the House language pretty quickly here. Section 1 is a technical amendment, renumbering the statutes. Section 2 modifies the definition of the certified trained facilitator. Section 3 modifies the deadline for literacy, strikes the deadline for literacy specialist training. Section 4 modifies the definition of oral language. Section 5 modifies the literacy goal established by the legislature, and it strikes the timeline for teachers to complete their training. That language is moved to a different section. Section 6 requires, and you'll see this in several sections, requires district to screen students 3 times per year rather than 2. Section 7, again, requires districts to administer a third screener. Section 8 relates to intervention and requires districts to use evidence-based literacy interventions starting in the 25-26 school year, and requires a paraprofessional or other unlicensed person to complete a particular training, approved training. Section 9 modifies the requirements for teacher and instructional staff training, as well as the literacy plan, and requires approved training for classroom teachers and early childhood programs. Section 10 modifies the local literacy plan requirements. It requires the plan to include a timeline for adopting approved curricula and materials. Requires the commissioner's summary of the local plans to include the number of teachers and other staff required to complete the training. And it requires some additional reporting from the commissioner. Section 11, again, that requires the 3 screeners to be administered to students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. And starting in 24-25 school year, only approved screeners could be used. Section 12 is a technical change related to the renumbering. Section 13, this is where you'll see the 2 phases of training for teachers. So phase 1, those teachers that are listed there, let me see if I can find, I think we're on page here, page R9. So the first phase is by July 1, 2026, and then there's a second phase by July 1, 2027. This section at the bottom of page R9, it also lowers the number of hours of required instruction by 5.5 hours for the 24-25 school year to allow teachers to receive training required under the READ Act. Section 14, this modifies the duties of the department under the READ Act, requiring the department to partner with CARE to approve literacy intervention models, post a list of approved models, ensure they're reviewed by a third party for culturally responsive guidance, and requires the department to provide ongoing coaching and support to certified trained facilitators. Section 15 establishes the READ Act program account in the Special Revenue Fund. As Ms. Beckel and Ms. Hofer noted, only the House had the account in the Special Revenue Fund. Section 16 modifies requirements relating to cultural responsiveness of approved materials. It strikes a reference to using state funds to purchase approved curricula, modifies the requirements for literacy lead training, and requires the department to contract with a third party to develop culturally and linguistically responsive supplemental materials and guidance for the approved curriculum. Section 17 requires the department and CARE to conduct a final review of previously submitted curriculum by March 3rd, 2025, to review curriculum that's available to districts at no cost. Section 18 is volunteer and paraprofessional training, and this was not one of the provisions that's in the policy conference committee report. This is a separate one. Right, yes, sorry, it's hard to track all of them. So this one requires the department and CARE to develop and provide training for volunteers and other unlicensed persons that regularly provide Tier 2 intervention to students in districts on a regular basis by June 10th, 2025. It requires the regional literacy networks to separately develop and provide the same type of training, but Carrie and the networks would coordinate to make sure that the trainings were consistent. And the trainings would be provided at no cost to unlicensed school staff that regularly provide Tier 2 interventions. Section 19, again, this is one that was not in the policy conference committee report. It requires the department to partner with one or more institutions of higher education to conduct independent and objective reviews of curriculum and intervention materials. Section 20 allows the department and an institution of higher education to partner to do a comprehensive review of curriculum and intervention materials starting in 2033. So that it would be a separate cycle of review. Section 21 relates to the Minnesota Reading Corps, and it requires the Reading Corps to use evidence-based reading instruction and interventions focused on structured literacy, and show that and demonstrate that their training meets or exceeds the requirements for volunteer training. Section 22 expands the uses of literacy incentive aid to include intervention specialists, screeners, and stipends for teachers that complete required training. Section 23 modifies the appropriation for the last year's appropriation for curriculum and intervention materials, and modifies how the money is distributed. It would go out as aid to districts, charter schools, and cooperatives, and it would require them to place the aid in a reserved account to implement the requirements of the READ Act. And I'll note that the Senate renamed it to READ Act Literacy Aid, but otherwise it's pretty similar. Section 24, this is the READ Act Professional Development. Again, this is the appropriation from last year. This requires, it's an additional $4 million for fiscal year 25. Requires the department to develop a data collection system for the local literacy plans. Allows the funding to be used to provide training for 4th and 5th grade teachers and literacy professors at institutions of higher ed, and has a provision relating to the special revenue fund. Section 25 requires PELSB to conduct an audit that evaluates teacher preparation programs to see whether their standards meet, whether they meet standards for reading. And PELSB would report its findings to the legislature. Section 26, these are the same in the House and Senate. It's a working group, the READ Act Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing Working Group to make recommendations on training, screeners, and curriculum for students who cannot fully access sound-based approaches. And then Section 27 is on the House side, and Section 9 on the Senate side is the appropriations. And so this appropriates money in fiscal year 25 for several purposes. One is it allocates money for the district's charters and cooperatives based on the number of teachers required to complete training. $1 million for the department to issue requests for proposals to contract for supplemental culturally responsive materials for approved curricula. $375,000 each for the regional literacy networks and CARE for the training for paraprofessionals and volunteers, and $100,000 for the deaf, blind, and hard of hearing group. And then the final section is a revisor instruction to renumber 2 statutes.
Thank you, Christina Parra. And I just want to thank nonpartisan staff for all the work they've put in on this. And it's quite a moving target, and I want to have a big shout out to Representative Edelson and Senator McQuaid for their tireless work on this, getting a lot of differing voices in the room and getting them to come together. And I wanted to give you each a minute to speak a little bit about the work you do before we move on. Representative Edelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to thank Senator McQuaid, who's been my partner in this. This is my last year, so you'll be taking over. And I want to thank Representative Clardy, who will be taking over READ Act for next year. This has definitely been, since I've been at the legislature for the last 6 years, something I have worked on extensively is literacy. And so when you and I partnered last year, and I just want to call out too, just at Minnesota superintendents, principals, school boards, at Allies, MDE, this has not been an easy process, but we have stuck it through, and we're still, working on some things right now. But I think we have many different iterations, and I just want to say that districts that have made this change are seeing the results. Making sure kids know how to read is one of our state's #1 educational goals. And so I just want to thank the chairs for making this investment in the READ Act and making this investment in our kids.
Thank you, Representative Edison. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first thing I want to say is Representative Edelson has been the lobbyist, legislator, the engine, everything for this for a lot longer than I've been part of it. And so, when you leave here, your legacy will be that Minnesota kids can read. And I'm really, really grateful for your partnership. And in addition to that, the groups that you named, also our staff. I mean, this has been so much work. We're like passing emails back and forth being like, on line 2.1 of the TS 132-4. I mean, it is the most intricate work, and I don't think I will ever not be doing it, but that's okay. And I'm really glad to have a new partner in Representative Clardy. And I also want to thank the chairs for allowing us to kind of handle this and trusting us to do this huge thing, and then taking most of your target and saying, yes, absolutely, we will put it toward this bill that we've trusted you to do. And then when you think about the districts and the educators and the admin, I mean, this has been like the most collaborative, widespread problem solving I think we've ever been able to do as a state, and we should be really, really proud of ourselves. And it's not just a couple of people, it's a lot, it's thousands of people. We're standing up a whole new way that we do literacy in the state of Minnesota. We don't generally do education policy this way. We don't generally do it like this, and everybody has jumped in to make sure that we're doing it the best. And so I'm just so proud of all the work that we have done. I went and I visited almost every elementary school in my district. I represent what was the largest balanced literacy district in the state, and I have seen the difference. I have talked to teachers that will say, like, that kid over there, the one that just asked me if he could read a second book, couldn't read at a 5th grade level when he came into my classroom this year, and now he's just itching to read more. And when you see that, it makes all of the exhaustion and the intricacies very much worth it. So I want to thank everybody because this has just been incredible.
Thank you both. Thank you all. It's really a systemic change in how we teach literacy in Minnesota that will lead to better outcomes for our kids and a chance for them to have better lives too. So thank you all. With that, members, are there any questions on Article 3? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 4.
Madam Chair, members, Article 4 is simply one section having to do with the carry forward of funds for the American Indian Education Aid Program. The carry forward that was previously authorized was for only 6 months. The House and Senate use a slightly different effective date, but both make the same change to allow those funds to be carried over one additional school year, one full year.
Thank you, Mr.
Madam Chair, that's it for Article 4.
Thank you, Mr. Strom. Members, are there any questions on Article 4? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 5.
Madam Chair and members, Article 5 is the teacher's article. And we'll start with Section 1, which is different in the House and Senate, but both relate to paraprofessional training. Both bodies clarify that schools refers also to intermediate, cooperative units, Purpose Center, and the state academies. In addition, the House has language about the 24-25 school year only, allowing a school to reduce the hours of training to a minimum of 6 hours, and requiring districts to pay paraprofessional test materials and testing fees for a paraprofessional that was employed in this school year who has not yet successfully completed the paraprofessional assessment or met the requirements of the paraprofessional competency grid. It also creates a process for the department and PELSB to work with interested parties to adjust the paraprofessional test cut scores and paraprofessional competency grid. The next section, it's similar, just slight, just the different effective date styles, and this relates to the basic alternative teacher compensation aid, or QComp, increasing the aid by the amount necessary to adjust for additional VPK pupils. Section 3, again, relates to QComp, requiring the QComp revenue to be reserved and spent only for the purposes authorized in the QComp statute. Section 4, and I should note, Section 3 was similar in both bodies, and Section 4 for the Grow Your Own is similar in both bodies, making tribal contract schools eligible to apply for a teacher preparation program grant. Section 5, continuing with Grow Your Own programs, and this is similar in both bodies, making tribal contract schools eligible for grants under the program, and allowing grant funds to be used on scholarships to an institution with an articulated transfer pathway with a board-approved teacher preparation program. Section 6 on the House side and Section 5 on the Senate side. This is on page R4. They are similar. They're similar. The House just strikes some obsolete language, and then the House later in the bill amends an appropriation rider. But I'll let the Senate staff speak to the Senate provision.
Madam Chair, members, on the Senate side, we have the same striking of obsolete language, but then the statement of regarding existing grantees being able to revise their grant agreements that the House carries in their appropriation rider, the Senate carries in the statutory section. Then moving on to the next section, Section 7 of the Senate file and Section 6 of the House file relate to the Special Education Teacher Pipeline Grant Program, and it makes that make tribal contract schools eligible for that grant as well. The next section, 8 of the House file, 7 of the Senate file is the same grant program and makes a change on the grant uses that the Senate adds that there can be community members affiliated with the grant recipient. Then Section 8 of the Senate file, for which there's not a comparable provision in the House file, is again related to the Special Education Teacher Pipeline Grant, and that authorizes the grantees to revise their grant agreements. And again, the House has that revision language in the appropriation rider. The next section is Section 9 of the House file, Section 9 of the Senate file, and it allows districts and charter schools that alter their calendar to provide paid leave to their employees, paying the full wages if the employees were scheduled to work during those closures. Section 10 of the Senate file, which is not a comparable provision in the House file, is a beginning of some student support personnel aid changes. This first section expands the definition of for the allowed uses to include personnel that whose work primarily consists of reducing chronic attendance or student absenteeism, I suppose. Section 11 of the Senate file adds attendance as one of the improving student attendance as a purpose for the personnel aid. Section 10 of the House file is comparable to Section 12 of the Senate file, and they relate to the reserve revenue of reserving in a fund balance the revenue that's for students student support personnel aid. It needs to be in restricted fund. And Ms. Parra can speak to the House changes on that section.
Madam Chair, members, the House provision delays the impact of a fund balance penalty for school districts, charters, and co-ops for fiscal year '24 only, and limits future years' fund balances to no more than the previous year's student support personnel aid.
And section 13 of the Senate file is at the bottom half of R8. And I believe this one was the floor amendment that got added that allows, allowed use is transportation costs for a cooperative member that has to go between school sites and provide those student support personnel services. Then moving on is House Section 11 paired with the Senate Section 14, and that's the appropriation for the Q-Comp, and that's an increase that's related to the VPK seats. Section 12 of the House file and Section 15 of the Senate file are the same, and those are extending the availability of the appropriation, just putting in language we usually do, but just missed last year.
Sections 13 and 14 on the House side, the House had similar language in the statute. The House just puts it in the appropriation from last year. In both cases, allowing the commissioner to allow a grant recipient to modify its program to align with statutory changes. So Section 13 applies to the Grow Your Own Pathways grants, and Section 14 is its special education teacher pipeline. Section 15 is similar in the House and Senate, and this is the statewide teacher mentoring program, expanding the individuals that can participate in the program to include Tier 2 as well as Tier 1 special education teachers. Section 16 on the House side is the same as the Section 17 on the Senate side, and we're on page R11. This clarifies that that a balance in fiscal year '24 appropriation carries forward into fiscal year '25. This is for the student support personnel workforce pipeline appropriation, and the next section for the teacher residency program, it's again making that balance available in the fiscal year, in the 25 fiscal year for the teacher residency program. In Section 18, this is there's a difference there between the House and Senate. The House, this is the Collaborative Urban and Greater Minnesota Educators of Color grants, known as COGMEC. The House clarifies that balance in fiscal year '24 appropriation carries forward into '25, while the Senate increases the fiscal year '25 appropriation by $1 million. Section 19 is the grant for the Mentoring, Induction, and Retention Incentive Program, and the House has that carry forward language, while the Senate also increases the appropriation by $5 million. The next section is the pathway preparation grants. This is the same in the House and Senate. It's Section 20 on the House side and 21 on the Senate, authorizing pathway preparation grants to be used to help Tier 1 teachers as well as Tier 2 teachers to qualify for Tier 3 or 4 teaching licenses. The next section, Section 21, on the House side, this is the Student Teaching Stipend Pilot Program. It has listed teacher preparation program providers that would participate in the pilot program, and that's on page R14. Each institution would provide a stipend to each student teacher placed in a Minnesota public school for a 12-week student teaching experience. And this would require PELSB to develop and administer a survey of student teachers participating in the program, and interview a representative sample, and would require PELSB to report to the legislature twice, first by February 1, 2025, and again by July 1, 2025, summarizing quantitative and qualitative information about the program. Section 22 is a House-only provision on paraprofessional qualifications. It requires the department and Pellsby, in consultation with school administrators and groups representing paraprofessionals, to take a look at the test cut scores and the competency grid for paraprofessionals. It requires new cut scores and a revised grid to be implemented by September 1 of this year. And both agencies would post new information on their websites and notify schools of the new standards.
Madam Chair, members, then on R17 of the side-by-side, Section 22 of the Senate file is a teacher and paraprofessional compensation working group, and it establishes a 22-member group that will report back to the legislature in February of 2025 on various trends and historical data and recommendations regarding teacher compensation. Then that gets us to the appropriation section. Both bodies have the subdivision 2, which is the special education apprenticeship programs. And then, next is House.
And Madam Chair, members, there's also an appropriation for Pellsby, $7 million for the paid student teacher pilot program grants for the student teachers.
And then, Madam Chair, members, on R20 is a Senate appropriation to Pellsby for the teacher and paraprofessional compensation working group.
All right, thank you for that walkthrough. Members, are there any questions on this article, on Article 5? Seeing none, we'll go on to Article 6.
Madam Chair, members, Article 6 is the charter school article. The first two sections are the same in the House and Senate, and just clarify the process for the charter school lease aid applications. Makes clear that the department is approving the application for lease aid and not line by line approving the lease itself, and makes clear that the information in Section 2 should be submitted in the form and manner required by the Commissioner. In Section 3, this is the appropriation that Representative Creshaw, or Representative Sensamura asked about a few minutes ago. You can see here that the slightly larger appropriation is for the additional VPK students built on top of the February forecast adjustment, which has already been added to the numbers. That's why the session law, 2024 session law, is being amended.
Madam Chair, on page R2 is a Senate-only provision in Section 4. This provides in fiscal year 2025, $3 million in total for Safe Schools supplemental aid for charter schools, and that amount would be apportioned among charter schools in proportion to their fall 2024 enrollment. It's a one-time appropriation. And that concludes this article.
Members, are there any questions on Article 6? Seeing no member questions, we'll go on to Article 7.
Madam Chair, members, thank you. Article 7 is the special education article. The first section has to do with the Adults with Disabilities program. As members may recall, last year the legislature modified and increased the funding for that program. The role of the reporting to the from districts to the charters was less clear than it should have been. From the districts to the department was less clear than it should have been. The language on the House and the Senate both does the same practical effect of simplifying the way the districts report that information to the department. Sections 2 and 3 travel together on the House and Senate side both. They're written slightly differently, but the goal is the same, and this has to do with qualifying the services for third-party billing. Third-party billing occurs when a school district may bill the medical assistance system for certain health-related services provided to special education students. This language, there's been a group that's been working on this over the interim and up through up through the time it went in both bills. The language essentially specifies what services in a more detailed manner, specifies what services would be covered and how those would be covered. Madam Chair, members, on the bottom of page R5, this brings us to the appropriation for special education. You can see here that the House and Senate language is the same. And again, this addition, this small addition is built on top of the forecast changes, as is the additional cost of the 5,200 voluntary pre-kindergarten pupils. Madam Chair, members, starting on page R6 is a proposal to have a special education funding recommendations. This was originally part of the legislation that Representative Hicks brought to the committee. In the policy bill, the DAPE provisions were adopted as part of that bill. A second part of Representative Hicks' proposal on the House side was for a funding analysis. As Ms. Beckel said, we're working through the spreadsheet. There was an appropriation for this, and this outlines the process the Commissioner of Education would use to contract with a consultant for purposes of reviewing the special education delivery and costs in Minnesota. Madam Chair, members, at the bottom is the appropriation for the funding report, and you can see there that that is a $440,000 appropriation. And that's it for Article 7.
Thank you. With that, members, are there any questions for Article 7? Seeing none, Article 8.
Madam Chair, I think next in the members' binders is also an article labeled Article 7. It consists of Senate-only language. In some cases, the language that had been carried in this article is matched up in Article 2, for example, for the health standards. But these are Senate-only provisions. There's just a few of them. The first is marked as Senate Section 7, relating to a crisis management policy. It would require the Commissioner to make available policy, require a school board or a charter school to adopt a policy. The kind of net effect on the number of drills in schools, I think, would be a reduction in the number of drills, because the language also reduces the number of required school lockdown drills from 5 to 3 and adds 1 cardiac emergency response drill. Section beginning at the middle of page R1 at line 63.1, section 8. This makes parallel changes to the school safety drills required for non-public schools and other educational institutions not subject under the previous section. Section 9 on the Senate side is a safe schools transparency provision and prohibits a charter school or school district from engaging in retaliatory action against a teacher for discussing incidents of school violence or dangerous conduct. At the top of page R2 is the kind of the meat of the cardiac emergency response plan. Describes the plan components, describes the timelines, describes required training and procedures. That's all I'll say about that. On the middle of page R3, section 12, appropriation section appropriates $1 million in fiscal year 2025 only for reimbursements to school districts for costs related to implementing the cardiac emergency response plan. And Madam Chair, that concludes the Senate-only provisions in Senate Article 7.
Members, are there any questions about those provisions? With that, we'll move on to Article 8.
Madam Chair and members, Article 8 is the facilities article. The first 3 sections on the Senate side were carried in, I believe, identical form in the House taxes bill. I understand from taxes staff this morning that I believe it's the taxes conference committee intent to not adopt these 3 sections in the taxes bill, but let this conference committee deal with these 3 sections on its own. So section 1, 2, and 3 all come from recommendations from the Minnesota Institute on Public Finance. Sometimes that's called the kind of public finance bill. Typically, that bill is carried as a separate article in the taxes bill and generally regarded as technical on non-controversial items. So sections 1, 2, and 3 all relate to certain review and comment requirements and make technical changes. Section 3 relating to the school building lease levy extends the, section 2 extends the kind of publication window to maintain the 40-day window that existed prior to laws 2023. Clarifies that when no referendum for bonds is required, the publication, public meeting requirements don't apply. And finally, section 3 amends the lease levy statute to clarify in the new language in paragraph G, the circumstances under which projects under the lease levy statute would require a review and comment from the commissioner. On page R2, House Section 1 and Senate Section 4 are paired, they're identical language, and extend the availability of the first-year appropriation in a similar way to other sections in this bill. On the bottom of page R3, House Section 2 and Senate Section 5 are essentially identical except for an immediate effective date, but the practical effect is the same. And Madam Chair, that concludes the special education article.
Members, are there? Sorry.
Not the special education article, the facilities article. My apologies.
Members, are there any questions on this article? I actually have one, so it was brought to my attention too. I sit on the tax committee, and it was always my understanding with public financing with those corrections that it was something done by Department of Revenue. Do they do those corrections within consultation with the different departments that they're changing? So have they talked to, do we know if they've talked to MDE about those provisions and if stakeholders have had input?
Madam Chair, as it happens, I saw Mr. Bagnoli walk into the room just now, and he may be able to offer more background on the consultation process. I do know that the department has had the opportunity to review these provisions for the last few months, and I'll let them offer their technical feedback if they have any.
Phone a friend from the audience if you want to come up. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Megan Adiola. I'm the Legislative Coordinator with the Minnesota Department of Education, and I will apologize. I just stepped back into the room in the middle of this conversation. So if we could repeat the original question, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I usually used to being in the tax committee and seeing this public financing be corrections or technical from the Department of Revenue. I was wondering if they also do it in consultation with the departments that they're changing. So I wanted to make sure with this language, MDE had been consulted with to change it before we even consider having it in the comments committee.
And to what page number are we on at the moment?
I will leave that up to nonpartisan staff to tell me. They've been following
Yep.
along this.
Madam Chair, we're looking at Article 9, excuse me, I'm already ahead. Article 8, the facilities article. It would be the first 3 sections on the Senate side in the facilities article.
Sorry, Arla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Arneson. Yes, our staff had a chance to review these changes before they were added to the Senate bill.
Thank you so much. That's nice to know. Then I just have a quick question for nonpartisan staff. Has this usually always been carried in public finance, or is it kind of bounced back and forth between the different committee divisions and taxes?
Madam Chair, in my experience, the public finance bill is typically carried in the taxes bill, but it was, as I understand it, the strong preference of the Senate taxes chair this year, that the provisions in the jurisdiction of the K-12 committee, for example, would be reviewed in particular by the Senate K-12 committee and carried in the Senate K-12 omnibus bill.
Thank you for that explanation. We'll have to have some discussions about whether or not we want to set that precedent, but we can move on. Any other member questions on this article? Next article then, Article 9.
Madam Chair, members, Article 9 is the Nutrition in Libraries article. The first provision is the same in both bills and has to do with the school food service fund and would allow lunchroom furniture to be purchased out of that fund, essentially freeing up general fund monies for those districts that have had a surplus in their school food service fund. The food service fund is one of the operating funds of each school district. The money in there is regulated both by the UFAR statutes and by the federal rules for nutrition programs.
Madam Chair and members, on page R2, Senate Section 2 is a Senate-only proposal proposing to establish a state school librarian. It requires the position to be established within the State Library Services Division of the Department of Education. The duties of the librarian are indicated in paragraph B.
Madam Chair, members, forgive my trance. On the bottom of page R2, sections 2 and the following section, section 3 have to do with the aid payment for school nutrition programs. This was just miscategorized. The payment remains at 100%, but there are two different subdivisions relating to the 100% aid payments. So the effect is essentially just technical. The nutrition funds would continue to be paid 100% out of the current year, not switch to a 90-10 schedule. So these are sections 2, 3, and 4.
Madam Chair, members, on page R3, Senate Section 3 is a Senate-only provision and proposes that the commissioner make an annual report to the legislature on how school districts and charter schools use school library aid. On the bottom of page R3, House Section 5, Senate Section 4, and actually the subsequent sections as well, House Section 6 and Senate Section 5, increase the appropriation for school lunch and breakfast aids to account for the additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats authorized later in this bill. And finally, Madam Chair, on the middle of page R4, Senate Section 6 is a revisor instruction proposing to recodify the school library aid program out of Chapter 134 and into Chapter 124D, where categorical aids to school districts and charter schools are more typically codified. And that concludes this article.
Members, are there any questions on Article 9? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 10, Early Childhood Education.
Madam Chair and members, similar to how Ms. Parr described, some of the earlier provisions have been already adopted in the policy conference report. There are a couple sections in that circumstance here as well. Section 1 proposes to divide the VPK seat allocation groups from 4 into 5, in essence splitting the Minneapolis and St. Paul school districts into their own allocation group. The stricken language in the middle of page R2 is essentially recodified in the new subdivision 5A titled Participation Limit Allocation. Both of these sections were adopted in the Policy Committee Conference report. On the top of page R4, House Section 1 and Senate Section 3, this is the section doing the work to increase the VPK seat allocation. Both the House and Senate language proposed to increase the seat allocation by 5,200 seats for fiscal year 2025. And the difference in the language here in paragraph B on the Senate side is language, again, already adopted in the policy conference report.
Madam Chair, members, Section 2 on the House side has to do with the Early Learning Scholarship Program. This regards the administration of the program, and beginning January 1st, 2026, directs the Commissioner to make the scholarship payments to the early care and learning programs early on rather than after the services have been completed. It also directs the Commissioner to implement a program that would allow a transfer of a scholarship between various programs or among programs when it's initiated by the recipient. Finally, it requires that the department have an information technology system in place by January 1st, 2026. There's also a direction to consider an integration with the Great Start Scholarship Program that I believe is first effective in the 28 year. Section 3 is the Early Learning Scholarship account. This removes the caps on the amounts of scholarship funds that may be used to create and maintain the information technology system, and it directs the Commissioner to report to the legislature on the use of those funds for any activity, including the technology activities, any activities that don't provide scholarships to children out of that reserve fund.
Madam Chair, at the bottom of page R6 is a Senate-only provision proposing to extend the age ranges eligible for school-age care programs, extending it downward from the current law kindergarten requirement to any children enrolled in the district, including pre-kindergarten children. House Section, on page R7, House Section 4 and Senate Section 5 are similar in that they authorize certain administrative costs from the Head Start state aid appropriation. On page R8, House Section 5 and Senate Section 6 are identical and extend the availability of the first-year appropriation for early childhood curriculum grants. On page R8, near the bottom, Senate Section 7 is a Senate-only provision, but it's kind of technical to the additional seat allocation for VPK. So if the legislature were to authorize additional seats, the legislature would also want to probably reopen the seat allocation process so that these new seats can be allocated for fiscal year 2025. Typically, the seats would have been applied for and allocated early in calendar year 2024. And finally, Madam Chair and members, Section 6 on the House side and Section 8 on the Senate side, the repealer, this repeals the $50 million reserved in last year's bill for allocation by this legislature. And this has the effect of canceling that $50 million reserve amount to the state general fund bottom line for reallocation elsewhere in this bill. And Madam Chair, that concludes the early learning article.
Thank you. Members, any questions on the early learning article? Seeing none, moving on to Article 11.
Madam Chair, members, Article 11 is the state agencies article. Here's an issue where the formatting of the House and Senate bill has presented a bit of a challenge for you. Both the House and Senate have provisions related to the Office of the Inspector General. Madam Chair, on the House side, you're familiar with the House provisions and may want to speak to the process as well. On the Senate side, I believe the bill was heard by Senator Latz in his committee, and I understand there may be ongoing work there as well. Essentially, last year, the Office of Inspector General was created, and this year the department proposes establishing powers and duties for the office in a more specific way. The language on the House side includes things like defining categories like abuse, fraud, and waste, granting powers, including certain subpoena powers, explicitly to the Office of the Inspector General, and then describing the areas that the Inspector General would be able to use their powers to look at organizations. And Madam Chair, I'm not sure the detail you want us to go onto the differences here if there's work underway to reach a different arrangement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Strom. Yes, I think we're still in discussions around this issue. We stood up the office last year and wanted to give them some more clarifying instructions, and the House had a little bit different approach than MDE, and we'll be having those discussions. Do we have more in the article to go through?
Yeah, Madam Chair, there's a few more provisions in this article. On page R6, on the Senate side, there is, this is amending the Laws 2023 appropriations to the Department of Education. And you can see the changes are near the top of page R7. The Senate proposes to reduce the amount appropriated from the general fund to the department for administrative expenses for unemployment aid by $130,000 in fiscal year 2025. And in the next clause, appropriate that money in fiscal year 2025 for the costs of the state school librarian. Senate Section 8 establishes a task force of 9 members to examine the distribution of earnings from the permanent school fund endowment. Establishes task force membership, specifies appointment authorities and dates. The task force duties include examining the historical returns on the endowment, evaluating and recommending potential changes to the distribution, examining policies in other states, et cetera. And it requires a report to the legislature in January of 2026. Senate Section 9 appropriates money for the administrative expenses of the Permanent School Fund Task Force. And finally, Madam Chair, House Section 3 and Senate Section 10 seek to accomplish a substantially similar thing, which is to fund the costs requested by Pelsby for their educator online licensing system. The appropriation amount is the same. The availability is the same. The Senate specifically identifies the licensing system itself, while the House describes the appropriation for information technology costs. But that's essentially the difference between these two approaches. And Madam Chair, that concludes the state agencies article.
Thank you, members. Any questions on Article 11? With that, we'll move on to Article 12. Oh, wait, we are done. I was going to say, we don't have Article 12. We passed that earlier this session. So members, are there any other questions that come to mind after doing the side-by-sides or the spreadsheets? Seeing none, I'll see if Chair Kunesh has any comments, and then we'll move on to what the rest of the conference committee will look like for timing.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks to our staff for reviewing this and your very in-depth knowledge of all of the works that we've been working on this session. I don't have any questions, but look forward to continuing this process.
Members, we will not be meeting tomorrow. I think the chair and I agreed on that. So the next time we will be gaveling in will be on Monday. Time uncertain yet, but we will let you know. And with that, we are adjourned.